Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is author Jatinder Koharki. We're going to be talking to her about her new book, Against the Odds of Tradition. Jatinder, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And as before we get into all about Jatinder, we're going to go our usual way and discuss things we may have read or watched in the recent past. Oh, did we like them? Did we not like them? Are we totally indifferent to them? I will go first just to give Jatinder a few moments to collect her thoughts. So it's been a kind of an exciting week around here because our neighborhood movie theater just celebrated its 100th anniversary. And so they had an entire week of films that were featured because they were giving a special award to a local woman who is a costume designer. And so all of the movies they had during the week were films that she had worked on. And that was really cool. I didn't go to all of them because there would be too many to choose from. But we did go to see, my wife and I went to see The Conversation on Friday. That was, well, it's one of my wife's favorite movies. And I've forgotten a lot of the movies since the last time I saw it. But boy, it's still very powerful and really just a great movie overall. And the next night was like their official big party. And so we each won passes to go. So I went to go see American Graffiti, which I haven't seen in 30 years. Really enjoyed that. And my wife, true to form, went to go see Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1970s version. One of her favorites as well. So we each had a good time, but it was very exciting. And of course, to counterbalance all that great film culture, you can't go wrong with a Jason Statham movie. So I did watch Homefront, which pretty much is a standard Jason Statham movie. You know, he's a guy with crazy martial arts skills and takes it out on some lowlifes who are threatening his way of life. That's all you really need to know. But that's it for me. So, Jatinder, what about you? Anything good or not so good on the reading or watching fronts?
Yeah, I recently read a book titled The Boxcar Librarian by Rebecca Lubeskis, and it's based on a true story about a librarian who starts basically turns one of the boxcars on a train back in post World War One era in the US and the West in the mountains into a boxcar, into a library, because there were, miners out there, families who were in the middle of nowhere, and she really wanted to bring books and knowledge and just interest beyond what they were doing on a daily basis. So she started this library, like a moving library, and it's really it's three main characters and their lives and different timelines that are being followed in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, leading up into our entry and and exit from the war. So it's a very creative way of telling a story about a central theme about reading and knowledge and libraries and unique aspects of being a librarian and getting knowledge to people, all centered around different lifestyles and different people from different walks of life. I really enjoyed it.
I have to ask, is it based on a true story? Because it sounds like something that really would have existed.
It is, yeah, it is based on a true story out in Montana.
Okay, wow,
Yeah,
Montana. Well, because you
yeah,
say they definitely have trains and mines and the lack of
absolutely. I
libraries,
learned
I
a lot
guess.
about Montana through the book too. So it's yeah, it's very informative all around.
Okay, that is fantastic. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
I love a good historical fiction, well, I guess semi-fiction novel.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to talking about Against the Odds of Tradition, I'm going to read the about the author bio on the back of the book. Jatinder Koharki emigrated from India to the U.S. at the age of 10. Against the Odds of Tradition is her debut women's historical fiction novel. Jatinder lives in the U.S. with her husband and navigates the unique world of interracial and interreligious marriages. Learn more at www.jatinderkoharki.com. All right, so before we get to talking about your book, Jatinder, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. I mean, how did you get your start? Were you always a writer? Were you a voracious reader as a child? Or was writing something you came into a little bit later in life and you said, you know what, I've got this idea for a story, and you started writing, you said, I really like doing this.
Yeah, I wrote a lot of poems and short stories as a teenager in high school, and I read a lot. I was reading nonstop. I think my mom still tells me, complains more like it about some of the collection that I left behind from my teenage years that I won't let her get rid of it, but she also is running out of room to store it. So
Of course.
yes, I was an avid reader and really enjoyed writing and just wrote as I had interest, not something serious, and put it away to go to college and start a career. And about 10, 11 years ago, I was really on a very stressful project. I've been in consulting for over 20 years now, and I was on a pretty stressful project, and I needed something to do because I was starting to dream about the work I was doing during the day.
Mm.
And I thought that's not a good sign. So I needed to do something else give my brain something else to think about. So I had this story running through my mind that I started to jot down. I actually added 2 hours to my day, took 2 hours away from the little sleep I was already getting just to write in the morning so that my brain could function and focus on something else. And that turned into Against the Odds of Tradition. The first draft of the manuscript was written 10, 11 years ago. And then I got over the stress of it, put it away. And then when I made a career change about 3 years ago, dug it up, had more time to focus on it, finished it, and now it's out there.
Wow, that's great. I mean, was it really a hard adjustment? Because I've seen a lot of writers who do that. They'll get up a little earlier during the day so they can devote like that hour or 45 minutes. Like I'm just gonna get up and write, and then I have to get ready for my day job, or maybe they'll do it at the end of the day. You know, if I'm exhausted, but I know I have to dedicate that 1 hour or so to writing just to make a little bit of progress.
Yeah, I'm a morning person, so it was much easier for me to just carve out that 1 to 2 hours earlier in the day, get up a little bit earlier rather than go to sleep later at night because given the work I was doing at the time, and I was traveling too, Monday through Thursday. I was a road warrior. This was obviously pre-COVID. So I would just, come back to my hotel room at night and just go to bed.
Wow.
There was no energy for anything by that time.
Sure, sure. I also like the fact that you kind of use the writing as not not therapeutic or catharsis, but more just like I have to do something that is not work involved. I think the statement I was starting to have dreams about this work project.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's just scary. You just have
that
to
was the
find,
trigger.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have to find a way to separate yourself from that, or else
Yeah.
it's just going to become so overwhelming. And I guess kind of like tapping into that creative outlet, excuse me, was just really beneficial for you, both in a creative way, but also in a self-care type of way.
Yeah, absolutely. It really became my therapy at the end of the day, kind of a rescue from just all the things that can stress you out, whether it's work or something else going on in your personal life. So it became an escape for me.
That's great. That's fantastic. So what was it? Before we get into talking about the inspiration for Against the Odds or Tradition, I like to ask the guest in screenwriting, it's the elevator pitch, you know, that 5 second, here's what the story's about. But for authors, it tends to be more the cocktail party pitch. So you meet someone, you say, oh, you know, Jatinder, I hear you've written a book, and tell me about it. What kind of book is it? What's it about? And you would say,
I would say it's about a woman who is forbidden to remarry, have a family, have children because her first husband died and her religious traditions forbid her to do anything after that. But she manages to cross the boundaries of race and religion to rebuild it up again, only to lose it all in 1947, and then have to work at it all over again. So it's really about perseverance, about taking what fate gives you, what life gives you sometimes, and doing what you can with it, and coming out alive on the other end.
okay, I love that. Taking what life gives you, that's really good stuff. I have to ask, I think you touched on this a little bit before. So what was the inspiration for this story? I mean, as your bio says, you emigrated from India, and that's where a lot of the story takes place. And we're not
Mhm.
going to get into too many spoilers for the whole thing. But was it something about your past? I mean, I have a question about this for later, but I'm very curious. Where did the story come from? Did it just kind of hit you, or was this based on personal experience or people that you knew in your past?
It's a combination of the history that I was already aware of. India's partition and World War II, their timelines kind of intersect,
Hmm.
and also personal experience. I do have a family member who's mentioned in the dedication, who was widowed at a young age. She had 3 children under the age of 10, and the family really rallied around her and helped her as much as possible, rather than letting her, kind of go on her own and or abandoning her, which happens to be the case for a lot of women, a lot of widows, not only almost 100 years ago, but even today. So that was the personal experience that I really took away from, just hanging on and helping someone with their courage and encouraging them and helping them as much as they can, as much as you can, given that they have the courage to do, what life has given them and make the most of it. But at the same time, it was as I did more research over the years to keep, to build the book again and build a story, it became more about telling stories, perspectives that haven't really been told in this way before. So there have
Hmm.
been plenty of stories about India around this time frame about women in India, but I think this particular point of view of someone who has been told, your life doesn't matter, you don't matter, all because your husband died and now there is no point to your life. How that person kind of goes from being told that and being made to feel that way to really, kind of doing something with their life beyond just, like Mina says, there should be more to life than pretending to be dead.
Hmm.
um to doing more than that. So yeah, that's it was a combination of just keep hearing those voices and the personal stories and experiences that kind of brought it all, kind of, I have to tell the story, I have to write this story, it needs to be out there.
Sure, sure. No, I was going to say that, I'm not as familiar with a lot of Indian culture. So just the fact that even this isn't really a spoiler, that this story really opens on page one that she's at, I guess her deceased husband's is a funeral.
Yes.
And she's already, I did not know that, widows have to dress all in white,
Hmm.
and that, and I'm not going to give any more away than that. But all of the things that she had to endure just as part of the society, it was just really, um, for someone not familiar with the culture, it's very surprising and almost shocking to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But I kind of asked, touched on this a little bit earlier, that Mina, our main character, that was she based on like one person or just kind of like she's a composite of a lot of women and also stories you may have heard, growing up or your familiarity with the culture.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also want to know if you have applied certain details of maybe from people you knew into Mina herself, or at least tried to incorporate them into the story a little bit more.
Yeah, so Mina is a combination of people, women I've known personally, who have been through the situation where they became widows with or without children, but they were able to build their life again with, that love and support for the courage that they already had from her families and friends and people around them who chose to support them rather than abandon them. But she also represents women who even today, there are over 40 million widows in India today who do not have a future like that. So she represents the I guess the parallel existence of women who are getting a second chance or a third chance, or who are going beyond just being told there's no use for them because their husband died, and women who are still dealing with that fact of life that because their husbands have passed on, that there is no use for them and for
Hmm.
their family or in society in general. So she's a combination of the two different things that coexist still in the Indian society today.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say, I found it very interesting, especially for the parts of the story that are set in India. There is a definite presence of the society and the culture of the time, but also you alluded to that a lot of that still permeates today. Was this something that you wanted to make a point of including to not really put a focus on it or a spotlight on it, but kind of add that detail to add to more realism for the story, or also to show like this is just a small slice of this big world that a lot of people may not be aware of?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I wanted to make sure that, to make Mina's story as real as possible, I had to bring those real circumstances and historical aspects in, right? I didn't want her to seem like you said, you were shocked and surprised by
Mm.
when you read just the prologue.
Yeah.
And I knew that would be the case for a lot of readers who are not familiar with this part of the Indian culture. And so I wanted to make sure that there were real facts and cultural themes in there that would help support Mina's circumstances and why she has to live her life a certain way, why she has to dress a certain way and look a certain way. So that was all part of just making sure that she didn't come across as someone, I could have just exaggerated from a
Mhm.
very small situation in real life. This is a very real situation for a lot of women.
Okay, I totally get that. And I really liked how, even though I guess it would be considered historical fiction to a certain extent, there's so much realism added to it, so many real details. But despite all of that, the focus is really on the characters,
Mhm.
and that all of these things are going on around them, and it's not just about the setting or the time period, but it's more about here is this woman and all of the people involved in her life that she really is the center of the story and the
Yeah.
heart of what keeps it going. Because I remember when initially read, I guess, the description of the book, and I said it involves partition. I honestly thought that was going to be a bigger part of the story, but it's not that it's an afterthought, but it's more like, okay, here's this woman and all of the things that she's going through in her house, but here and they allude to all of the big events that are going on outside the house, but the focus stays on Mina and everything going on around her. Was that part of your intent, that it was about her and her story, not just this one character in this big world, but more like one person, her immediate world, and that's in the middle of everything else.
Yeah, that was thank you for asking that question. That was really the whole point. I didn't, and people have asked me if the book is about Indian culture, and my initial immediate reaction is no. It is not. I didn't want it to come across that way. This is a book
Mm.
about Indian culture, about the Indian, India as a country. It's really about Meena. It's really about the things that are happening around her that are impacting her life because she goes through different stages of it, given where she started. So everything that's happening at the local and global stage impacts her, but it's really about her journey and the journey of a few other key characters around her who really, need to figure out who they are along the way and how they're going to get ultimately not only what they want, but also what they need in life.
Okay. One of the other things I was thinking while I was reading it, now not to use too much of a cliche, but there is a kind of like a soap opera-esque vibe to it. It's really about the emotions of the characters, and their actions do play an important role, but it's really more about the emotion and the feelings that everybody is experiencing because you touched on everybody. Now, was it really the story you started with, or as you were working on it over time that you kind of decided, okay, this would work better this way, or what if I introduced this character? I mean, was it was it set in place when you started, or did it take you time to develop all of the subplots and the primary story? Did you know what you were getting into when you started, or did it kind of come to you gradually as you were working on
Yeah.
it?
I had at a high level at that time, 11 years ago when I first
Mm.
started writing it, I had a very high level idea. I had a summary that I had written down to kind of work around and see where it goes. And at that time, one of the central characters in the story wasn't even he was not even
Oh
in the story.
wow.
The first, it was a completely different story. I actually had a different title for it because I wanted it to be not only about Mina, but also about India. But then when I picked the story back up again and I thought more about it, it was really, the story is really about Mina and she deserves, along with the other characters, she deserves to be able to be the center of the story and have everything else kind of happening around her, because of her, to her, what have you, depending on where you are in the book. So there was at least one character that who's a main character was not in the original manuscript, and then I added that person into the when I started revising and editing and rewrote the whole thing, and it became the ending is completely different,
Oh
and yeah,
wow.
it became a different story.
Oh, that is huge because I know a lot of writers when they start, they have to they it really helps to know what your ending is going to be so
Yeah.
you can work towards it, but to drastically change the ending. Well, which came first? Was it that as you're working on the story and then you came up with new ideas? Because I've talked to writers about this before where they're working on something and something inside nags at them saying, this isn't working. I don't like how this is playing out. And they kind
Yeah.
of have to backtrack to the point where things went the way they shouldn't have. So
Yeah.
was it like that for you, or were you almost at the end? You realize just something's not clicking for me, and just kind of have to like take a step back and think, okay, what is not working here for me?
Yeah, what was I did figure out what wasn't working because there was something about the manuscript when I picked it up after 10 years, or yeah, almost 10 years now, 2, 3 years ago. Something wasn't working because I kept thinking the story, the original title that I had come up with was The Price of Independence.
Hmm.
And it was really about not just the price of Mina's independence, but also the price of India's independence, because it did come at a pretty high cost. And so the nagging feeling was, do I want it to be equally about Mina and India? But is that
Okay.
going to take away from one or the other? If I try to focus on both of them at the same time. So I had to pick one. But I also, like I said, I also didn't want it to become about India and India's culture. I wanted it to be for a diversified set of audience, not just audience who would be interested in Indian culture. They would be interested in more the story of Mina or someone like Mina, where they could relate to the person being in certain circumstances. So that was a deciding factor of, do I want it to be more about what happened in India to India, or more about to Mina and Mina's life in the context of the time period she was living in?
Okay, so that raises two questions. The first one is, okay, so removing some of the focus off of India itself and more on Mina, our main character, did that drastically affect the way that the story was told? And if you don't mind me asking, and feel free to say, you don't even want to think about it anymore, what was the original ending? Or is that,
Yeah.
or if that gets into too spoilery territory, that's okay too.
Yeah. So, sorry, what was the first question?
Uh,
I got a little obsessed with the second question.
Oh, okay, that's okay. So first question is that as you were taking less focus away from the India aspect of the story, more on Tamina, did that really drastically affect how much rewriting you had to do?
Yes, it did end up having. I ended up rewriting, I think, um most of it, because
Hmm.
my very first draft was from everybody's point of view. It wasn't
Oh,
from just
wow.
Nina's point of view. So I was doing this for more therapeutic and mental therapy than to become a professional writer. So my first manuscript, when I picked it up again, I thought, wow, this is telling everybody's viewpoint on every page. I don't know how anyone's going to follow this. I'm struggling to follow my own story that I wrote. So that was the first process of rewriting, is I need to tell it from Mina's perspective. And so that required a lot of rewrite. And I did end up rewriting it because that forced me to think about Mina more than really just the context of India and the events that were happening in India at the time. So that kind of forced the rewrite from focusing on both of them to maintaining more focus on Mina. And the original end of the story, she like I said, one of the central characters was not even in the original. So the original ending had actually nothing to do with one of the current central characters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, so she ends up she remains in India. All I'll say is that the original ending is that she remains in India and did not build her life the way that she did in this story. It was more tragic, and it was more of a longer tragedy than in the current. And I thought, okay, that's just a little too tragic. I
I was
have
gonna
to
say
give her
you don't
something.
want to have
Yeah.
a story that ends on a downer. So,
Yeah, right. So I don't want to drag her through the mud the whole time, because this is a story about, love and courage and crossing boundaries and perseverance. So I can't drag her through the mud for 300 pages. So yes, that ended up in a lot of rewrite as well.
Okay, I love that. That is quite a contrast to like what the actual ending is. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about is that uh, the story has three sections, and each one is set in a different time period. I believe they're about like 10 years apart. It's because it opens in 1937, then we jump to I think right is partition. That's like
Yep.
47-ish.
Yep.
Okay, and then I think we jump like even one more after that. I want to say
Yep.
like the mid 50s.
Yep.
And I just thought that was a really interesting approach, but it stays with that very contained set of characters. But it's also about how they have changed since the last time we saw them, especially the ones who, like the first one starts out as a baby and then he's like, his early
Yeah.
20s, but that goes without saying. But was it challenging? I guess, was there some research involved? Because I assume you want to try to keep each time period, uh, time period accurate, but
Yep.
also that was it challenging to, you have to add 10 years to the character? Like, how have they changed? And you're the writer, so you have to really convey that. Was that really challenging, or was that, was it something you took a lot of time to approach and took your time in writing out?
that was very difficult because it's there are a few characters who go through their own journey in the process in the story, and then they go through things together, and everybody kind of has their own dynamic with each other. And the most difficult part around that was the historical aspect of it, to
Hmm.
make sure that I was doing justice to how India was across those 20 years, how England was, London specifically, across those 20 years. So I ended up doing a lot of research and reading on just the state of things before the war, after the war, even some during the war, and to really kind of get to the heart of where India was by the time that independence became such an important and critical issue that there was just no other way around it. I actually ended up reading about the the 500 to 700 years leading up to independence, because there was a lot of foreign rule for about 7 centuries. So to really kind of get into the mindset of who Indians were by the time that independence rolled around and what that really took. And that's where you see a lot of those freedom themes along the way as we
Hmm.
move through Mina's story. And that's why those became really important, because they were so ingrained in the identity and in the soil and in the minds of Indians. So I had to really kind of understand what that would feel like, how someone would think about it, and the conflicts that they might face internally. So yeah, there was a lot of research, a lot of reading just about what was going on broadly in those different parts of the world.
Okay, I'm very curious. So, to kind of verify the historical accuracy, did you ask, you mentioned your mother before we started. Did you ask like the older generation, or like someone who might have been there or their parents were there, like to give it a look and say like how accurate is this? And did they say this is spot on? This would have happened instead of this? I mean, I would love to know like what kind of feedback you got, especially regarding the historical aspects about it. I mean, before you published.
Yeah, I actually, before I interviewed or gave the manuscript to those who would be familiar with the historical situation, I had a couple of beta readers who would not be who were not familiar with it at all, just
Hmm.
to kind of see what kind of questions they would have in their mind, what kind of gaps they would think that they didn't quite get, or what were some things like this didn't make sense to me. Like, is this really real? Is this really happening to women, or
Mm.
is this true and from what happened 90 to 100 years ago? So I took those aspects of it as feedback to really kind of flesh out, okay, make sure the reader understands the historical background and context. And then I ran that by some, folks who I know very closely in my own life, and just using stories from my own family. The one that's mentioned in the dedication that I talked about earlier, and a few other instances. So I just kind of ran those by some family members, and just to kind of pressure test to make sure that I wasn't depicting anything inaccurately or exaggerating anything in any way.
Okay, that's great stuff. One of the things I also noticed is that the story overall is much more contained than I expected. That even though it's set, like the first two-thirds are set in India, a lot of the scenes and the chapters take place in the house,
Mhm.
in Mina's house, and also a little bit in her father's house. It's really just a handful of locations over the course of the whole story, and in some ways, it really comes across that it's almost like a stage play. And I was curious if you were that was your intention while you were putting it together, because a lot of the scenes are take place in just a handful of locations, rather than like, okay, we have to get in the car and we have to drive to, like we got to go to Bombay and then we have to go to
Yeah.
London. And for the most, those are really just a handful of scenes, but a large majority of the story takes place in maybe, I don't know, three, four locations.
Mhm.
Was While you were writing it, is that how you envisioned it, or do you just think this, it's just about the characters and where these scenes are taking place it's almost secondary?
Yeah, that became very intentional as I was going through the editing and revision process, because I read a lot of historical fiction. I'm a huge historical fiction fan myself, and women's fiction. So I was reading a lot at the same time to understand how other authors are incorporating the scenery, the locations, the proximity to different locations and things. And in the end, it was very intentional that I didn't even name the village where Mina lives.
Hmm.
And if I'm sure readers noticed that I name the big cities, but I don't name the smaller towns and villages. I don't describe what the streets look like, and that's very intentional, because I didn't want that to take away from what the characters were going through because it's not, as far as outside of symbolism, I didn't want that to become, oh, this is what India looked like, this is how
Mm.
India felt to people, or this is how they lived everyday life, because that's not what the story is about. It's really about the characters who are going through a journey and how the trees look down the road. Not really
I
relevant to
was
how
going to
they're
say
feeling. Yeah.
it's about the characters, not specifically about the world the characters live in.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
I totally got that one. And one of the things, especially with a lot of writing, is that conflict is a key element. Just about any story, and this one has it in spades. So, I mean, it's really, but not that they're, not like people shouting at each other, but there's conflict with Mina and pretty much every other character or every character. And she interacts with everybody. And not that the conflict is shouting or in a negative way, but there are conflicts. Now, while you were, I guess we'll call it mapping out the story, I guess the second time since you had to go back,
Yeah.
did you have an idea of what those conflicts were going to be, or did it take you time to figure them out? And also, on that note, since you had to go back and not start over, but had to take a different approach, did that change what some of the conflicts were between Mina and certain characters?
Yeah. I had starting off the second time when I started to rewrite, I did map out the very highlight, like key conflicts that would influence certain events in the story to keep moving it forward in a direction that I wanted it to be in. And then that revealed additional conflicts that those same characters would have with Mina and Mina would have with them. So it was a fun process because I knew that this big stuff had to happen between Mina and one character, but then working through that conflict and who else would be involved in that conflict started to reveal those very more detailed conflicts and little nuances of, just like how people feel about each other on a daily basis that they don't express or that are unintentionally expressed. That those started to reveal themselves, and that became more fun once I
Uh,
started working my way through the central conflicts.
Sure, sure. Were there ever times that maybe you realize, oh, I have this relationship or this conflict. This is what I had in mind, but oh, this would be so much better. And then you'd go back and and touch it up or punch it up a little bit. Were
Yeah.
there ever any moments like that? I mean, and were there any ramifications or consequences of doing that on the rest of the story? Like, okay, this little change that I did, back on page 60, that's going to affect things for the rest of the story.
Yep. Yeah, I think the main changes that I made, like tweaking Mina's emotional reaction, like the intensity of her voice or
Mm,
the physical action that she's taking while she's expressing an emotion. I think that kind of made a huge difference for me because it allowed me to give the other character that flexibility or that room to react to what she was saying and how she was reacting. So sometimes it was subtle and sometimes it was very clear, as I'm sure you read in some cases where she's just like having an outburst and telling someone,
mm.
how could you do this, etc. So those were more revealing, just thinking about how she would react to someone in this situation. Would she raise her voice, or would this person raise their voice, or would they go back to being who they were when how they react emotionally, or would they have evolved over the last 10, 20 years? In
Hmm.
some cases the character did, in other cases the character didn't, because that was better that they didn't for the
Okay.
story.
I was going to say that Mina really does seem to personify like an emotional roller coaster. That she is really excited, she's very happy, and then she's extremely depressed, and then here comes a twist and a curve, and everything gets thrown at her, and she endures somehow. Um, that with screenwriting, a lot of characters from the main character to someone who appears in like maybe one scene, a lot of the time characters are some reflection on an aspect of the writer's personality. Now, I'm not saying that Mina is a direct reflection on you, but are there aspects to her, or I guess we could also go back to the with people that that you wanted to make sure that she had?
Mhm. Yeah, her I think there are certain reflections of my emotional I guess, roller coaster-ness in her sometimes, because depending on who it is and what the situation is, I sometimes will have no reaction. Sometimes it will be a strong reaction or sometime in the middle. And I think that's reflected in her in some key scenes that I can think of right now off the top of my head. So there was definitely that aspect of it, but then the whole I think the other characters, one of my best friends who read the book, she said, I think I know exactly who your husband is in the book. And I said, okay. So
Wow.
we talked about that for a half hour. So
And
yeah, so
was your friend, what was your friend right?
she was, yeah. She was, yeah, she was right. And because I've known her for 30 years, I knew she would get it right. But
Mhm.
so yeah, so she had it right. But yeah, there are definitely characters where I've thrown, like a personality trait from my dad, for instance, and Mina's dad, or I've thrown a personality trait from a friend into, Mina's friend, one of them. Or yeah, so it's you borrow from real life, and that's the fun part.
Okay, that's great stuff. I guess speaking of the characters, did you find that you were guiding the characters, or were they guiding you? And I guess as a kind of a follow-up, did sometimes you had a character do something that totally surprised you as the writer, that you were not expecting that to happen, but you realized this would work much better for both the story and for that character?
I started off as directing the characters and wanting them to do certain things. And then as the rewrite, the more, cycles of the rewrite and the editing, I started to realize, okay, this is not really who Mina is, or this is not who this person is. They wouldn't change this way, not too fast. And they would not want to handle a situation this way, or this person has, more of that. I learned from the last time this happened, I'm not going to let this happen again. So it was after a while, I started to listen to the characters through the editing process and really let them reveal how they would handle a situation. So there wasn't too much contrast, right, between a character in part one to that character in part three, unless I revealed how they changed in that journey. So that
Okay.
helped kind of keep me in check to say, that people don't change that fast or change back that fast, or have too much going on. We can be emotional roller coasters, but I think over the long run we can clearly see how someone has changed, and need to either show that or not change them at all.
Okay, and I have to ask, so when you went back to do all those major changes on the story towards that new ending, did that have any kind of impact, especially like a significant impact on certain characters? Like suddenly, like in the previous version, they were like this, but now that you're taking this different approach, they're suddenly, they've made a 90-degree turn, they've made a 180, they're the total opposite of what you started out as.
Yep, definitely. I can say that for at least two of the characters. One of them who was a baby in the beginning and then grew up like that. That person's whole, life story changed from the very first manuscript to when I rewrote it, because it's a complete switch from how the story went and ended to how it ended in the version that's out now. And then there were, like I said, there were a couple of characters, at least one major character who did not exist in the original version, and then a couple of more minor characters who became important in the new version, but I had not thought of them at all in the original version. So that was also the fun part of thinking about, okay, these are new characters that are coming into Mina's life. How do they fit in? They need to, they fit in
Hmm.
because this is what's happening. So I can't just keep them out. There's a reason they're existing. So that was the fun part of figuring out, oh, I didn't think of these characters before, but now they're important. They have to
That's
be in the story now.
Oh, that's fantastic. I have to ask, were there, as you were putting everything together, especially in the early stages of development, were there details that you wanted to include, but realized, I don't really have a place for this, and just was where you were not able to, or were there times you thought, this isn't enough, I need to expand on this, I need to build it, I need to really, ramp this up, so to speak. Uh, did you ever encounter either of those while you were working on the story, I guess, initially, and then also during the rewriting process?
Yeah, some of this was based on some of the feedback that I received, which was very helpful. And there was some relationship development that seemed to be missing from Mina and one of the central characters. So at first I wasn't really catching it, but then when I, read it again and again and again, and I realized, okay, this is what's missing in making sure the relationship develops in a way so it makes sense when we get to it 10 years down the road and 20 years down the road. So there was more that I had to add, which meant taking some things out
Hmm.
because they were no longer, they just didn't, they weren't relevant, or there was a little too much description going on. I had a little too much background, what we call exposition, I guess, in the writing
Sure.
world. So I did have to take a lot of that exposition out and kind of redistribute it in a more creative way, so that rather than just telling the reader, "Hey, here's how it is."
Okay,
So
and I also want to add we are talking to Jatinder Koharki about her book, Against the Odds of Tradition. So you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier that you went to beta readers, but you also got feedback about the historical aspects of the story. I'm very curious to know what reactions have been to the book, especially from people within the Indian community and people outside of the Indian community. I'm wondering if those within the Indian community will be like, "Yep, that's exactly how it was," and for people like me outside the community, be like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that's what this was like." I mean, I would
yeah.
very curious to know, both reactions from both sides of that.
Yeah, the reaction from the Indian community was predictable because everyone, knows just how things have been. And there were some things like the fact that widow remarriage had to be legalized. It
Hmm.
wasn't just a given, right? Like in our society, we don't even think about someone remarrying twice. Like, oh, someone got a divorce or their spouse passed away, so they're getting remarried again. They met someone new. But in that case, even in today, for some women in India, that's just not, what do you mean you're going to get married again? Why? What's the point?
Hmm.
Etc. So that aspect of, just having to legalize getting remarried for a woman, which never happened for a man. That was just a given. A man's wife dies, he remarries. But for a
Right.
woman, it had to become legal for that to happen. So there were some historical nuances that surprised Indian people when they read the book. But then the non-Indian community, like you said in the prologue, when the story begins, they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Like, I can't believe that's what was expected of a woman just because her husband passed away. So I think that's that initial shock of
Hmm.
the start of the story. I think that's what catches everyone, and I'm glad it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Well, it is certainly an attention grabber, and it certainly makes you wonder, "Oh my gosh, what is going to happen now?" But then your protagonist. What's really great is that she's very active, that she
Mhm.
does react to things, but a lot of those are things out of her control. But the things that she does have control over, she always seems to find a way to come out, not necessarily on top, but she manages to overcome the odds of the things that are going against her. And I think that's part of what her appeal is that
Mhm.
because you want to root for your protagonist.
Yeah,
Even if you don't really like them, but in which not the case here. But you have this woman, and I guess starting with the worst possible scenario, and she manages to overcome that.
yeah.
That you want to see, okay, how much further can she take this of her overcoming things? Okay, so your current book is Against the Odds of Tradition. So what's next for you? I mean, are you working on like another historical fiction type of novel or something a little more modern or up to date type of thing?
Right now, working on more of a contemporary women's fiction, not so much historical. It takes place in this century, so it has some reflection of my college years and just growing up and coming of age. So it's an interesting take on a girl growing up in New York City. So not exactly like me, but just very different circumstances. I'm taking a lot of familiar places and things and shoving it into a story I hope that's unique.
Okay, that's great stuff. Okay, so again, we've been talking to Jatinder Koharki and her book Against the Odds of Tradition. Jatinder, where can people find out more about you and the book if they want to order it? I mean, I assume you have a website and are on a couple of social media platforms.
Yes, they can find my book on Amazon and also on my website, jatinderkoharki.com. I'm also on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Substack. You can just search for my full name and it should show up. So, yep, any way that works.
All right, fantastic stuff. Again, we have been talking to Jatinder Koharki, and her book is Against the Odds of Tradition. And you can check out her website, which she just said, jatinderkoharki.com. That'll be in the show notes on the platform on which you are listening or watching this right now. Jatinder, thank you so much for being here. This was a great book, a very emotional read. And but despite all that, it was still a lot of fun to read.
Good. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being on the podcast.
Well, thank you much. I very much enjoyed having you here today. And viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like. Feel free to leave a comment and subscribe. I want to let you know our audio theme music, that is by Mark Gunyon. And for my social media, you can check out my screenwriting blog, MaximumZ.blog. This show is on Blue Sky at Podcast CWL. I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books. They're on Amazon. Those are the three books about screenwriting and pie. Like I said, that's Jatinder. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life Podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.